Hello and welcome to Makers.dev episode 46. These numbers just keep going up. It's amazing. Chris, how you doing?
I am doing pretty well. The weather here is really nice, actually. It's not crazy cold yet, so yeah, it's good.
The perfect fall weather. This is one of my favorite times of year. It's not bitterly cold and it's not swelteringly hot. If it could just stay right like this, then I guess I'd be living in California.
Yeah.
What did you get up to this last week?
I had grand plans to do some Acorn chat stuff and some other things. I did mostly my master's lab because it was supposed to be one of the easier ones, and I guess it is, but it still is complicated. And so yeah, I did a lot of that, and I did other stuff too. Like we spent some time to take fall pictures and stuff like that. But a lot of it was the lab.
Cool. Would you like to talk about the lab? I feel like I'm living vicariously through you, like getting a master's.
Yeah, so there were two of them, actually. The first was a deep learning lab, so that was part of it. So the deep learning labs have been really easy for me, and this one was easy too, except I was getting like a 92 out of 100, and like because it's auto-graded, I can do it as many times as I want. And so I spent probably 10 or like maybe 20 hours just to get the last 8 points. It turns out, I was doing something wrong, so I did learn something. I already knew this, but if you add... Okay, so in deep learning, you have activation layers, and if you have like a nonlinear activation just before your final activation, then your performance is going to tank. And I accidentally, because we were doing like blocks, I accidentally included a block with a nonlinear activation just before my softmax, just before my last layer. And so, that's why my performance was not doing nearly as well as it should have. So, I spent 10 or 15 hours on that I wasn't expecting. And then the other one is for parallel systems. This is like the third paradigm we're doing. The first one was C++ pthreads. The second was CUDA, so on GPU programming. And then this one is using Go. And Go, it has a very interesting way to do parallel work. You spawn things called Go routines, and they are not really threads. It's lighter weight than a thread. It's more like a fiber. And so you could have many of them running on a single thread. And so you can launch like 1 million of them, and your runtime will just take care of how that breaks up into threads. And so we're using those for this lab.
How interesting. Several follow-up questions. What is nonlinear activation?
Oh, yeah. So, okay, in deep learning, so it's just a bunch of matrix multiplications and additions, right? Mm-hmm. But if you just did that, then you could only learn linear regression, basically. So you could draw lines through your data, right? Mm-hmm. To get, like, actual good groupings, you have to have something that's nonlinear. So you can think about these like if functions. So instead of... it's hard to draw without graphs, but basically you have... instead of just functions that you multiply that are lines, you have functions with either bends in them or curves. So like tanh is one. Anything that is not just a line, you could use as a nonlinear activation. And that's what makes it more than just a single linear regression.
I've seen visualizations of this, I think, of it's machine learning trying to cluster dots together. There's red and blue dots, and it's trying to figure out the shape that it can differentiate between red and blue dots. And if it's linear, it's just trying to draw a line through it, and sometimes that works well. But if it's something like a cluster of red dots right in the middle and then a bunch of blue dots on the outside, the shape that you need to be able to correctly identify the red versus blue dots is a circle right around the middle. So if you only have linear activation, you can't really draw a line that separates the red and blue dots if it's going right through the middle. Is that right so far?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, but I think you're working now in n dimensions. This is not like
yes.
a 2D graph. Okay.
Yep.
So if you said if you have a nonlinear layer right before your output layer, that's bad. Can you explain why that's bad?
Yeah, so the output layer was using categorical cross entropy, which is just a fancy way for saying that it's going to pick between one of n different classes. So we're trying to separate images into 5 different buckets. Okay. And that already includes a nonlinear activation. And so it expects your data to be nicely distributed before it gets there. So if you apply one of these nonlinearities just before that, then that last layer is going to have a much harder time learning. So it'll learn something, but it just won't do very well at all. And so I just got rid of that. It's basically like it's trying to do two nonlinear activations in a row that aren't communicating with each other.
I see.
And so they screw each other up.
Okay, you were plugging into something else that also is doing nonlinear activation, and so by you doing nonlinear activation directly before that, which is now the input to this next nonlinear activation function, that's just too much complexity to deal with at once.
Yeah. In this particular case, like it changed the distribution of the data going into a way that it's not expecting, and so it like cut off a whole chunk of the availability of the network. Yeah.
Okay. I need just a second to geek out of like you're studying how to create minds, and you're like, you're figuring out this, like, what an interesting problem that if you zoom out, this is a problem you would get in designing a brain. That like those are the weeds that you're in. This is the minutia. This is like the intuitive sense that you're getting now that this work that you're putting in. Yeah, you spent whatever a couple of hours extra on this lab, but you gain from that this newfound sense of like, oh, when I'm making a brain, I need to make sure like not to cluster the neurons in this way. Amazing! Like this is we're living in a sci-fi novel. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I had some questions about Go. Also, I've been really interested in Go, but I don't feel like I've ever encountered a problem that Go would be a good language to solve. And it might just be that I'm not encountering any of these massively parallel problems. But I'd love sort of like a sales pitch for Go of why it would be important to have fibers instead of threads. What is there a I kind of want like a sales pitch of how this would be useful to me as a tool and what sorts of problems I could do if I had access to fibers instead of threads.
Sure, yeah. So there's two kind of ways to think about it. One is how it was designed. So it was designed by Google and designed specifically to like Google has a million servers, right? And each of those servers have 16 cores or 32 cores or whatever. And so writing C++ to go across a million servers and 32 cores sounds awful. And so they designed Go to have these primitives that are like, instead of like a whole huge chunk of things to manage your threads, you just say like Go and then a function, and then it's just like goes off and does its thing. So it has primitives in it that make it super parallelizable across not just different cores but different machines as well. So that's when you would use it. Building SASs like we do, you almost certainly don't need it at all. It's more like, so they call it systems programming. It's like, like network level, like shuttling data around and doing stuff with it across many machines. That's why you need it.
Okay. It sounds like Go is a language that makes the DevOps of running that sort of problem of deploying it much easier. That they've thought through not just how is this easy to write the code. They've thought through, well, when you're running this and you have it massively scaled and you need to run the solution in parallel across a ton of machines, that they've designed the language to make that next step easier. Is that right?
Yep, exactly. They've also done things with the language too. Since they were building it from the ground up, they got to do things like the core language is super small, and so you can like read through the whole paper of it in like an afternoon. And also it compile, like they were really focused on super fast compile times, because compile times is where programmers time goes to die, So like super fast compile times, good linting, stuff like that. So
cool. Cool. Okay. Sounds like that's not something that I need to learn right now, but it's good to know that exists if I'm doing something massively in parallel, like more machine learning stuff. I was reminded of serverless computing, of particularly working with Firebase, of like, it's sort of a difficult sales pitch when someone's just learning web programming to be like, no, Firebase is really important, and yes, there's this extra minutia you need to do if you need to be thinking about stuff in this new serverless way. Because it seems so much easier if you're just developing on your machine to make one monolith or a PHP script or like a Rails app or something. And so the sales pitch for serverless is like, it really makes the next step easier. Yes, you have to be making some sacrifices in how you're developing it, but if you confine to these constraints, now deploying it is just trivially simple, and scaling it is trivially simple. And those are really hard problems if you're developing apps in the traditional way. That's the sort of feeling I'm getting from how you're describing how Go is designed.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Makes
then
sense.
you asked about fibers versus threads. It's not exactly fibers. Go routines aren't, but they're basically, think of like a thread can do one thing at a time. But if you spawn a million of them on your machine, you'll crash your machine. So Go is specifically designed to let you spawn like a million Go threads, and it will figure out how to map those onto your CPU cores so that you don't crash your machine. So you can just
interesting.
spawn them. Yeah, you can just spawn them however you want, and your machine will figure it out.
Okay, it has an extra layer of thread management that are the number of fibers I can spawn unlimited? Is that
So let's see. They showed us a graph. He tried to crash it. The professor did. I think he got to 10 million maybe on his machine or something like that. So
wow.
it is limited, but you can do a lot of them. Yeah.
Cool. I remember when I took operating systems in my undergrad class, we learned about fork bombing, and it was like, if you run this program, I think it was using pthreads in C++, you'll crash your machine. Watch. You got to crash our machines. So it sounds like doing that in Go would be really hard.
Yeah, it's specifically designed not to let you do that.
Cool. Neat. That's fun. I have a follow-up from last week that I'd love to talk with you about. I deleted YouTube on my phone live on the call. I think you also deleted Twitter live on your call.
Yep.
I have a lot of thoughts about how that went. How did it go for you?
Sure. So yeah, I deleted Twitter, and then after the call, I said, why not clean up the rest of my home screen? So I cleaned up like all the things that, except for there's like 8 apps now on my home screen, like weather and notes and stuff like that. And then I kept some of the rest in folders and stuff. But yeah, so I went super minimal. So it feels good. I noticed. So what all it did was it really focused me, like when I was reaching to my phone for distraction, because I went to go hit the Twitter icon and it wasn't there anymore. So it's like more cognizant of that. I think I'm gonna get used to it though. What I ended up doing instead a lot of times is going to Safari and opening Hacker News. So I like replaced one with another. But that's all right. And I still have access to Twitter on my computer. It's just more focused, interaction with it. Yeah. So it went pretty well, I would say, but not life changing. Yeah.
Almost exactly the same for me with YouTube. First of all, I was sort of horrified. Like every moment that I caught myself trying to open YouTube, I was like, "Whoa, where did that come from? Who was in charge just then?" And I followed up right after the call. I wrote that little program that I talked about of redirecting me if I go to YouTube, if I just type in by muscle memory youtube.com, that it redirects me to localhost 3000. And I coded it so it pops up a random encouraging message of like, hey, it seems like you're a little distracted right now. Why not go for a walk, or why not like do some push-ups, or work on a fun project? And it still kept happening over and over. And I think the primitive part of my brain that just craves this dopamine learned a little bit that that's not a way to get dopamine anymore. So I replaced it with Hacker News, and I replaced it with Imgur. And Imgur is just like even worse. It's just like these little pictures, and they're funny, and then you get to a meme dump, and ooh, this is great, and it's a little dopamine hit one after another. So the obvious thing to do is to apply the same tactic that I did to YouTube to Hacker News and Imgur. I've already gone so long without being on Hacker News, I feel like I don't need to do that. And Imgur just feels like complete trash. That I absolutely don't need to do that. I found a few funny pictures that I sent to friends, and they were like, "Oh, this is related to this thing that we were talking about." But like, I don't need that in my life. Here's the thing I'm currently struggling with. I would like a healthy, like this process is a process I know I'm going to go through. I know I'm going to have 100 moments this next week where my brain has whatever this impulse is that then causes me to go to youtube.com, and then I'm going to be like, oh, I can't go to YouTube. I want to go to Imgur, and if I can regain control of myself, that won't happen, but like, this is a thing I want to prepare for. I want to come up with things that I can do in that mental state that are healthier and easier to get out of, and more redirecting towards doing more work that I'd like to be doing in the long term. Because otherwise, this feels like it could turn into an endless game of whack-a-mole of like, okay, well, I've blocked off Imgur and Hacker News and YouTube, so now I go to TikTok, and oh, okay, let's block TikTok. Like, I want to try to figure out what the deeper thing is that my brain is craving in those moments, and make that more available. I'm reminded of the analogy of like, if you're going on a diet, it is very helpful to like get rid of all the snacks and candy in the house, but you also need to have healthy vegetable snacks ready and available. This is a topic I think we've talked about before, but how are you framing that? Are you happy with the amount that you were on Hacker News and it's not a problem, and you feel like you're getting enough out of that, or do you feel like that process could be improved? And I'd love suggestions on. I'm not even quite sure what I'm asking, but like, this process doesn't feel good yet. I would love if in those moments I was redirected towards something else that still scratched the itch in a similar but healthier way.
Yeah, so I have several thoughts. One is, first, I'm pretty happy with my phone usage this week. I found myself scrolling less, so it's harder. Like on Hacker News, you see everything, and then it doesn't really change that much throughout the day. So, and then I also found, on my phone, I found myself looking at Hacker News like when I was waiting. So a couple times I was in lines and I was just looking at it. So that I think is fine to do that. And then another couple of times I was with my kids and I went for my phone to look at Twitter and I was like, oh, I should be with my kids. This is not Twitter time. And so it actually made me more cognizant of that. So that was good. I was going to bring up a food analogy too. You said you should have healthy snacks around. There's also something to be said for like, if you're really craving chocolate, then you might have like some hummus and that doesn't work. So like some eggs and that doesn't work. And so you might have all these healthy things and then eventually just eat the chocolate anyway. And so you've like wasted a bunch of calories and then ate the chocolate anyway. So I'm thinking of something like every time you find yourself going to YouTube, maybe you could like add 5 minutes of YouTube budget to the end of the day or something. And that's like all the YouTube budget you need. And then at the end of the day, you watch your, 30 minutes or hour or whatever of YouTube that you budgeted.
Yeah. That's interesting.
So something like that. So you still get the chocolate, but it just comes at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Another thing is like, what would I replace like YouTube with? Like, I know it's a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole, but what if like I redirected to youtube.com to go to like pictures of my kids or something? Like I would still get a dopamine hit, but I would look at them for less time probably, just because it's not the endless, suck of YouTube.
Yeah.
So maybe replacing them with something that gives you a similar dopamine hit, but is less addictive. Those are some thoughts.
That last one resonates with me the strongest because I'm reminded of there have been several courses that I found on YouTube of things from Stanford, and like a crash course has fantastic courses on history and science and math and things that maybe how about this? What if I made my own version of youtube.com filled with the videos that I actually want to watch?
Yeah,
so
I think
like it's still dopamine hit, but it's go ahead.
I think you've had this exact thought before also.
Man, I'm remembering this now. Yeah. I think I have.
Yeah.
I think it was to redirect it to the watch later list. Yeah, man, it's circumambulation. It's like I spiral around and every time I'm getting closer to something, but yeah. Okay, that feels like
and
good.
Then the other thing that would be really easy, which I think we talked about last time too, is make a Chrome extension that just hides the what to watch next like side, because that's where I get into YouTube things. That's like I see 3 videos, so I open 3 more tabs, of what to watch next.
I hid that the last time we were talking about this, and that has been great. It still automatically plays a video up next, which got me once, so I would like to disable that.
You can disable you can disable autoplay. It's a setting.
Cool. I will change that setting. Okay, cool. And then thank you for reminding me of the idea that I had already had. I'd like to put together, 9 videos that are on deeper contexts that I'm not going to get sucked into. I just want to watch the next one, but they're still going to provide that dopamine hit. Because part of this process I actually like of like, if I'm stuck in something, it does feel productive to go off and do something else and just exercise my brain in a different way. And then when I come back to the main thing I'm doing, I'm looking at it with fresh eyes, and I've been exposed to these new ideas. And so I think the thing I'm yearning for is just a healthier process, because I get too sucked into YouTube if I just let it go unfettered. And then, 2 hours have gone by, and what have I done in the last 2 hours? I've watched 100 people fighting over a mountain of $1 million in cash, and I am made no better by watching this. So I'm getting as much as I can out of it, of like seeing the meta-analysis of, oh, this is interesting that this is the sort of thing that can get 50 million views on YouTube. And but I'm not happy retrospectively with how I've spent that time. So yeah, okay, I think redirecting that towards healthier videos, pre-selecting those of, okay, if you want to scratch this itch, scratch it by relearning chemistry, and that's an okay thing to do. And you don't want to do that right now, here's a menu of the things that previous versions of you have selected would be a more productive way to spend your time. Okay, cool. And that I would much rather be doing that than slipping into Imgur or Hacker News or TikTok. So that feels good.
Cool. Yeah. The other thing, which I mentioned before, but is worth repeating for YouTube specifically, there's 2 tactics I use to be really more careful about this. One is for anything I know I want to watch, but will impact my like future what to watch videos negatively. So like 50 people fighting over $1 million, watch it in incognito mode, so that it won't get on your history. But if you do watch something that gets on your history, you can open the hamburger menu, go to history, and then be really thorough about deleting anything that's like remotely dopamine driven. You know, it's like, yeah, I keep that, you know, so that my suggestions are far more educational or creative. I like to watch a lot of creative stuff like woodworking videos and like people doing projects. Like I find that pretty energizing. And so most of my history I keep as that, and any of the junk brain food I watch on incognito or delete it from my history.
Since you recommended that to me on this show a couple of weeks ago, I have done that several times now, especially after, you know, when traveling, I'm just frazzled and I allow myself to just, okay, whatever you need to get through the day. You need some YouTube, fine, watch whatever you want. And then after the fact, going through and editing, like, it feels so cathartic, and it feels sort of deeply philosophical of like, if I could go back in my life and do that, if I could go back and edit, like, did I actually want to eat this food? No, let's delete these foods from my gut, so that's not like feeding into the person who I am in the future. It feels like such a healthy process. And then, man, it's so interesting seeing the spirals that I go down of like, wow, I watched 10 Family Guy clips in a row. This is just, oh, where was I going with this? Okay, here's this one video that was okay to watch. It feels like a process of like editing myself that I wish I could apply to more context. I wish I could go back through the day and like look at all the thoughts that I had thought during the day and be able to edit like, ooh, this thought is self-damaging. Let's remove that and just strengthen the pathways of the few healthy thoughts that that went through my mind. I love that process, and I wish I could do more of it.
Yeah. If Neuralink works or something like that, then maybe someday.
Oh my gosh! Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Oh
yes.
Oh, that's so dystopian. Yeah.
You know, I'm here for it. And I don't see how things could be any different. And, I think the game with it is like you can't stop technological progress. It's just about how do you navigate getting the healthiest things from it and avoiding the traps from it. Cool. I will say I had a huge positive benefit from going through this process. Something about not preventing myself in this way from spiraling into this particular spiral freed up a lot of extra energy of like, I was able to push forward all these projects that I hadn't gotten to that had just been sitting on my to-do list for months of like listing my car on a site where people can rent it from me, and doing a bunch of meal prep and pushing out new features of Midnight that I had been thinking about forever. Spent just 15 minutes on Midnight and did these features that meaningfully pushed the project forward. It felt really good. And had a moment working on a project with a friend that I'd love to talk to you about, of feeling this transcendent feeling that I hadn't felt before. My friend Trig, who's a professional magician who I've talked about before on the show, bought this robot arm. And he just wanted to ask me some questions about it, of what was possible in it and how I would architect a system that he's thinking about doing for it for his show. And about 45 minutes into the call, I had the thought, oh, the way that this is structured, it's Arduino and it's running on Raspberry Pi and it needs to be controlled remotely, and I understand every part of this. And so I asked him, can I just go into your computer and try out a few things? And 2 hours later, I had devised this just brilliant system that worked perfectly and went into 2 days later was actually included in his show, and that wasn't a thing he thought he'd be able to do for the next several months. But the point that really stuck out to me was just the feeling I got working on this project. I felt so in flow, and that's a feeling that I want to spend more of my life in. It was really hard, and it was challenging, and it required all these different parts of me, and remembering how serial connections work over USB, and trying to think of creative ways that I could go and alter the code on this thing remotely, and pushing that, combining that with coming up with this really clever network flow of how to get commands from the internet through a web interface all the way through to the serial connection, all the way through to moving these servo motors on this robot. It felt so good. It reminded me of what it's like to work on a project like that I just feel so excited by. And that one, the project is done, and I can't spend any more time doing anything meaningful on that, but I would love to spend more time in that state. I would love to find more problems like that, and I'd love to better understand like what was it about that project that sparked that energy in me. Do you have any thoughts on that? I think this is something similar that you feel. There are projects like this that you also feel that same spark. How do I get more of that? What do I do?
Yeah. So yeah, being in flow is like there are several books written about the topic. So if you haven't read some of those are great. Yeah, it's one of my favorite feelings in programming too. I call it like thinking in the language. That's one of the things. Like Ruby is the first language out of school where I really like felt like I think, and then just like I didn't have to think about syntax at all. I just my idea just came out straight onto the screen. And that's happened with JavaScript now too. And so yeah, whenever you can let all the stuff like syntax and all of the minutiae of things just settle down, and you already understand them like viscerally, and then just do the thing you want to do. I think that's when I really get into flow, and yeah, it's a super exciting feeling. It's hard to track down sometimes because you need like you said you spent 2 hours, right? You need extended periods of time where you're focused and you can get into it, and you also have to have all the basics taken care of for you, like so you don't have to think about those. But once you do that, yeah, it's a really great feeling.
I had also put myself in this frame of mind where my brain didn't feel itchy. I had not fallen into the well of YouTube, and that felt really good. I haven't read Flow. Have you read Flow? I think is the book you were referencing about the
and then there's a couple others. So I read it like I read a lot of businessy type books, which is like I read all of the chapter titles, then any that seem interesting, I go and skim, and then any that seem more interesting, I go and read. So I did that to read. Like 1 year, I read 100 or 200 books or something that way. It's a neat experience if you have never done it. You can read a book in 30 minutes. So that's how I read that one, I think.
That seems effective. That seems like the sort of book that's summarized in its title. This a lot of these businessy books feel like resumes for speaking engagements that, okay, you do have one core, useful, interesting idea, but it really could have been a blog post that you ballooned into a 300-page book, because it's got to be 300 pages or people aren't going to hire you for speaking gigs. Okay, cool. I will read it in a similar way. Thank you. Cool. I have one more question I'd like to ask you involving Twitter. My ego was bruised a little bit, and
Twitter can do that.
I had this stroke of inspiration one day last week of this beautiful analogy for how to understand how big a billion is, because that's something I have a lot of trouble with in the context of time or in money or in like computer bits. A billion is just a really big number, and I had the idea, what if there was an extended analogy that equated like $1 with a bit and with a year, and then I could have that analogy and compare things against each other. So, and that would give me a much. It's three contexts where it's still kind of difficult to understand the scale of it, but maybe if I'm relating those things against each other, it'd be much easier to do. And that turned into this 4-hour thing of making graphics of, $1 of gold is about the size of a grain of sand, and then $1,000 of gold is about the size of a coin, and $1 million of gold is about the size of a brick, and $1 billion of gold is about the size of a 1 by 1 by 1 meter cube. Oh, this is cool, because now I can just visualize things in the scale of this one unit of how much gold is the thing. So, Elon Musk has this many golden cubes, and the Parthenon in Rome was built 4 gold coins ago, where every year is just one little grain-sized fleck of this thing. This unit of magical gold that can buy you years and bits and everything else. And the new iPhone comes with something like 16 gold coins of storage. And I started getting an intuitive sense of it. And I wasn't sure what to turn that into, if that was like a video or a blog post, but I had the thought, this would be a perfect Twitter thread, because each of these ideas and analogies would be a perfect little tweet. So I put this together, put a bunch of work into it, made this tweet thread of like 20 different tweets, and published it, sort of half expecting like, this might become viral, and I might become internet famous for this, and oh gosh, what would I do if I just had so much fame that I couldn't deal with it on Twitter, known for this one tweet storm. And I came back to it an hour later, and I had 0 notifications on Twitter, and I looked like, surely this is a mistake. And I looked at the thread, and I looked at every tweet in the thread, and none of them had any likes, and I was thinking, was this private? Did I publish this I haven't published a lot of threads. Did I do something wrong? Maybe no one's seen it. Maybe that's why. And I clicked on one of them, and it said seen by 200 people. And I was very disheartened, but also sort of academically curious of like, how does Twitter work? There has been some fundamental misunderstanding of my model of how tweets work, because this is something that I thought would be really interesting, that I thought people would think was cool. What insights do you have on that? Because I don't feel like the amount of work I put into that, or the interest level of the ideas, deserved zero. Like I feel like I should have gotten one like. I can't think of the last tweet that I tweeted that got that level of disengagement. And you're much more active on Twitter than I am. What insights do you have? Is there something here that I'm not understanding?
Yeah, so I have lots of thoughts. So first of all, you told me about this just before this call, and I hadn't seen it. Part of that's because I hadn't been on Twitter as much because I deleted it off my phone. But another part of it is, so I have noticed recently and in the past, like Twitter changes the way their algorithms work, and like at certain points, I just feel like Twitter shows my tweets to people who don't react as much to my tweets. Like, so sometimes I can tweet stuff, and for a certain number of impressions, I get a certain number of likes that seems outsized compared to other times, and it kind of goes in cycles. So it may just be that they showed it to people that just weren't going to react to it. So that's one thing. The other thing, though, is, so you said a few things in there. One, so it's kind of your first Twitter thread, or your first big one, right? I did, I don't know, 20 or 30, and eventually one of them blew up, right? And so there's just some level of doing many of them before one of them is kind of randomly gets big. The other is, you said you don't use Twitter all that much, and so if your followers aren't primed to expect a certain kind of content from you, then especially the first time they see it, they're going to ignore it. That happens like all the time. So what I would have done if you wanted to replan this was start leaking out bits of the idea in just single tweets over a couple of weeks and see which one gets the most engagement, right? And then whatever the most engagement tweet is, make that your first tweet, and then make the Twitter thread after that. So people are primed to expect that content from you, even if it's just over a few weeks. You kind of use those single tweets as like recognizing what gets the most engagement, and then do your tweet thread. The other thing you said is that it was 20 tweets long. That's pretty long for a tweet thread. Like most are maybe 10. That's pretty good. Or so some are like 5 to 10 or like 60, like as much as you can do. Like some of those go crazy too. Let's see what else. Yeah, so that's a lot of my thoughts. I probably had more, but any reactions to those?
I like the idea of, well, there's two interesting ideas there. The first is this idea that I also got from the Part-Time YouTuber Academy by Ali Abdaal, of to have a successful YouTube channel, you kind of need to be hitting the same note over and over. You need to prime the audience of like that they expect the same sort of content from you, that they're primed to get that, and that's what you're rewarded for the most on these sorts of channels, which is something really difficult for me because I am all over the place. I have so many different interests and so many different things, and like this tweet thread was unlike any other content I've published, but they all share the commonality of like things that I am interested in, and so I like the advice of if I had primed my Twitter audience with this type of content and got them more used to it, so that this is now more of a rhythm of a thing that they're expecting. I can sort of pivot this ship of, oh, okay, things with gold in them as an analogy. I know what the sort of content is. I know what to expect. Sort of like I'm designing this to tickle the dopamine receptors of human brains the most. That feels like the problem that I'm optimizing for, which kind of feels gross saying it that way, because that's exactly the thing I'm trying to avoid. Like that's why I'm getting off YouTube in the first place.
That's true.
Gross. I guess like I think the way I'm justifying it is that I feel like I have better content than other stuff on Twitter. I would like more of my stuff to be out there in the universe and less of hateful stuff. I'd like people to learn a useful analogy for how big a billion is, and not, I don't know, whatever the latest drama going on Twitter is. It feels like a useful thing to be doing.
Yeah. So I thought of two other things when you were talking, which was you mentioned that it's unlike anything else you did. Sometimes, so the reason tweet threads do well is because people can view all the content right there. Usually linking out to like a blog post or something doesn't do very well because people don't like to click off of Twitter, right?
Yeah.
But if the content is so different than everything else that you've published, it may have been worth publishing it as a blog post and then just put one nugget that is kind of like the other stuff that you post, just the most interesting nugget as the tweet, and then have a hook with a link to your blog post.
I like that. That's interesting.
Because like surely you could pull out something that's at least similar to something else that you've posted before, more in line with what your audience likes.
I like that.
And then the other thing is, can't remember where I heard this. I think it was Harry Dry on the Indie Hackers podcast. He talked about why people actually like or especially retweet Twitter threads. And it's not because they learned something interesting. It's because they want to look impressive to their friends for retweeting it.
Yeah.
And so this gets even more into the kind of feeling bad about how you're crafting things. But you want, when people retweet that top tweet, you want them to look smart for having retweeted it. And that leads to more retweets.
Interesting. I feel kind of gross about that.
It is a little gross. Yeah.
Yeah. Because thinking of the top tweet that I did in this thread, it was something along the lines of like, I've really struggled with understanding how big a billion is. And I wonder if the feeling people would get from retweeting that would be like admitting ignorance. But at the same time, maybe I was tweeting that because it's sort of like a humble braggy thing of like, I'm the sort of person who contemplates how big a billion is. I'm a big ol' intellectual. Interesting.
Right.
This
so
is
if I was
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if I was going all the way on the clickbaity side, then your first tweet should have been something like, when you finally understand how big a billion is, you won't believe your brain or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like make it about them understanding it. And when you retweet it, it's like, oh, I understand it now. Do you understand it?
Yeah.
So that's all the way on the, what I would say, bad clickbaity side. So, but finding somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
This is sort of a philosophical thing I need to get used to, of like, I don't like that about myself. that I want to advertise to other people that I understand what a billion is. That I strive for humility and like trying to be open to new information. But like, yeah, that's the part of humanity that I would need to be pandering to get more stuff out there. Huh. That's a thing I would like to think a lot more about. When I remember the tweet thread, that one of the ones that you did that blew up was about React hooks in series of tweets. How do you frame that in this context? How, when people retweet that, like, what is that doing for them for retweeting it?
Yeah, that's a good question, because so that one blew up. Yeah, it's like learn React in 10 tweets with hooks or something like that. I think that's what it does. What I was doing there very specifically was like all of the tutorials I had seen for React or hooks were like 2 hours long or like lots of, so I was like, how far can I compress learning React? Like, and make every tweet like super, super informative, add graphics for everyone. And like how small can I make an encapsulation of learning React? And I got down to 10 tweets. It took me probably a week. Like, it was a lot of work actually. And I got it in there. And after that, it's kind of luck. So I think the real reason it blew up is because Dan Abramoff retweeted it. So he's a creator of Redux. He's on the React core team, or he was. So that got like loads and loads. Kenzie Dodds also retweeted it, and so some of it is just lucky. The other thing that was interesting with that one that happened, and I don't know how big of a thing this played, was I was at React Boston. Like I tweeted that, and the next day I was at React Boston, and I live tweeted that conference when I was there, and I got a lot of retweets from React Boston, and then people looked at my account and then retweeted the other one as well. And so I kind of accidentally piled it into a bunch of React content. Yeah. And then in terms of what people are looking at, like a lot of the comments were stuff like, I learned more from this tweet thread than I did in my entire boot camp, stuff like that. So it's like, I think it's just, I spent all this time to compress a bunch of information into something. So in that case, it was way more educational than clickbaity, in my opinion. Yeah. I'm noticing several trends in that of, it sounds like that came at a time when you were hitting the same note over and over of React. And then we're in a room with people learning React, and here's this thread about this relevant topic of how to learn React quickly. Interesting. Why psychologically would someone retweet educational content like that? What's the emotion that someone would feel if they had just seen your talk at React Bootcamp, and they go to your Twitter feed and they see that you have how to learn React with hooks in 10 tweets?
what feeling do they feel that leads them to click the retweet button? Why would they do that? Because it doesn't feel like it's look at me and how smart I am. But maybe it is. I don't know.
That one I tried to design so it was not look at me how smart I am, but this is a great resource that other people should know about. I tried to get that feeling.
Okay, so it's they're trying to be valuable in their own spaces. This is something that they know that people who follow them are struggling with. And so if they retweet it, they've found something valuable that they think would be valuable to someone else. So if they retweet it, now when someone they follow sees it through them, they'll associate, oh, this person has valuable things about React. This is a useful person to be following. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Interesting. Huh. The psychology of viral content is should be a class.
It is.
It's what the next marketing degree program should be about. It's just like
probably
how to understand why people publish stuff like that.
Yeah.
Neat.
The other thing I'll say about Twitter is I sort of already talked about this, but you said you haven't been doing it very much, and this was your first tweet thread.
Yeah.
Tweet threads have kind of fallen out of favor a little bit. People recognize them as sort of a growth hack thing, marketing tactic. So there's sort of some pushback against threads, I think, now. The flip side of that, though, is so there's a couple, like in machine learning, there is at least one guy who he does like one of these tweet threads every single day. I don't know how he keeps up with it, but he always gets tons of tweets, and that's because of the audience priming. Like his audience is priming, like every day he's going to have some crazy tweet thread, and so that's when they can do really well. But his entire Twitter persona is shaped around that, whereas yours is more like about being online with friends, I think. So
yeah. He's. I think I know the guy you're talking about. I think his name's Visa. I want to say.
I don't remember his name. Yeah, I know his picture because it shows up.
It may be another separate person, but the person I'm talking about, or the person I'm thinking about, is hitting the same note every single day. It's like interesting things involving crypto and involving the future of technology. And
this guy's just AI and machine learning stuff, so it's a different guy.
Okay.
But same
similar
concept.
Similar topic. That's a theme I'm pulling from this discussion is the more you can just be hitting the same note, the more you can be delivering the same sort of consistent content. That if you told me, oh, this person has a new tweet, what things can you say about this that are true? I could list like 10 things that would probably still that would probably be valid about whatever the next tweet that he did, just because he has a very strong brand. He has a similar taste. Like when you go to McDonald's, you're going to get the same hamburger every time, and they're just hitting that note over and over and over again, and that's how they get such a big following. If people can go to you and expect a thing that's going to help them to feel a specific feeling, then they'll start craving that feeling, and they'll want to go after that more, and that's how you get a bigger following. Okay.
Yeah. And this is exactly how, so Wes Boss and Steve Shoger are maybe two of the biggest, in our sphere anyway, two of the biggest people who I know have built their audiences this way. Same thing, like they constantly push out content, or they used to constantly push out content that was almost, the same, but it was really good insights. Steve Shoger, he did design, right? It was good design, like every, couple every week or something. He's since stopped because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to do this.
Yeah.
But yeah.
The thing that drives me crazy in this is like, I don't want to hit the same note over and over.
Yeah.
I feel like I really enjoy that I can, be reading a book about parenting and be really interested in that, and then go over to learning machine learning and then learn about how to build a tiny house. That's when I feel the most alive and in flow. I'm jumping around stuff and I'm drastically context switching. And so a thing that I think I've found difficult is finding a single note that I can feel satisfied just hitting over and over. I also thought of Marie Poulin on her Notion stuff. Like she's just hitting that note over and over and over again of like Notion, and doing it in a way that she can bring other parts of herself into it, of like meal planning. Here's how you do meal planning in Notion, and like finances. Here's how you track your finances in Notion, and relationships. Here's how like my husband and I have our shared Notion account and how that helps our relationship, and business and things like that. And I don't yet feel like I've found that one single note pillar that I can keep hitting over and over and attaching other stuff to.
Yeah, I'm similar. And if you don't, it used to be React, but I sort of stopped that. One, because it's a ton of work, and two, because I didn't always want to tweet about React. And so, yeah, if you don't want to do that, your following is just not going to be as big as people who do. That's, yeah, it's just not.
It's disheartening. The way I've tried to solve that is to try to make separate pools of places where I can hit the note over and over. But then what happens so like when I made a coding school, I made that its own separate thing, and it has its own website and it has its own YouTube channel. But then what happens is like, okay, I've put some stuff in there, but now I'm just going to totally ignore that for a year until I come back around to it. And then when I come back around, okay, I'll put some more content in there, but then inevitably I'm going to circle back around again and ignore it for a little longer. It's a problem that I feel like I've had a lot. It's a general problem in my life.
Yeah. If you're not going to focus on it, then it's kind of a big waste of time to make its own thing and do all its own stuff.
I just don't know what else to do. Like, it doesn't make sense to be publishing coding tutorial videos on my primary Twitter channel because that's not who that audience is, I don't think. And it doesn't make sense to do that on my primary YouTube channel. And I don't know. I feel like my email list is the one place where I feel safe just publishing whatever I do because that's the one commonality in there of like, this is my audience of people who are just generally interested in the stuff I'm doing. It's a thing to keep chewing on.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have good answer either, but yeah, if you switch around between multiple things, then Twitter or YouTube is not the best platform. I mean, the best platform is probably something like not even a blog, but like a website with content that doesn't have dates on it, because then it doesn't matter how long it's been since you posted. And
then SEO seems to reward you just like how popular is your blog, and and then if people are searching for stuff, they can find that whatever that content is.
Yeah, I don't know who came up with this term, but Joel Hooks calls it digital gardening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more like you have this content and you sort of prune it and shape it and stuff. And there's no dates because like it's just content, right? But you are constantly, I mean, it doesn't matter when you do it, constantly for 2 weeks, right? And then a year later, another 2 weeks, right? You sort of prune it and shape it, and it gets better over time. But there's not this expectation that it is updating all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the answer. Maybe I'd like to be just investing more in my blog because that is the one channel that I feel safe just saying anything that can have any sort of content on it. And I have seen rewards in very different pieces of content on the blog. That does seem to be sort of feeding it on itself of just the more popular any individual thing is on the blog, even if it's not coherent in that it's hitting the same sorts of notes, the more popular the entire blog seems to get. Okay, that feels like a good takeaway. Neat. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. I like that. Good stuff. Chris, that's all I got. Then I will see you next week. Goodbye.